The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to Entrepreneurs Ascending. This isn't just a podcast. This is a call to action for all entrepreneurs who are tired of seeing their businesses and communities suffer while big business continues to grow by the billions. We challenge you to apply the content of our time together to create businesses that your clients can't resist, your employees love to work for, and your communities can depend on. Now is the time for Entrepreneurs Ascending. Hello, this is Entrepreneurs Ascending, and I'm your host, Matt Barbie. And our goal here is to give you action steps, things to take away and start implementing today in your business. And the spirit behind this is because, just like we said in the intro, big business has done really well. I'm not saying big business is necessarily bad, but I'm saying that small business needs to really step up their game. As a small business owner, it's not good enough to just do the platitude marketing of the past of the, well, we're a family owned business, so please come down here and support my family. It's time to really say, okay, there are a million resources out there. We do free business coaching. If you go to freebusinesscoaching.eventbrite.com, Jason, if you want to throw that up there, we offer that for free. So, and there's YouTube University. There's a ton of resources. So there's no excuse to be lazy. It's time to take action, massive action, better action, smarter action to help your business thrive and help your community thrive, because your business is a staple to the community. The more people do business with you or other small businesses in your community, the more that money stays in the community, and the more that allows the community to fund what it needs to fund to grow, right? So please take really careful consideration. Now, we're going to talk today about two different topics. Okay, we're going to be talking about, oh, hey, I think our guest is here. Jason, go ahead and bring Marvin in here. But we're going to be talking about, hey, Marvin.
Shoot.
That's all right. Hey, we can hear you. We can hear you okay. So, and we're live, just as a reminder. So it's all right. It's all right. Get yourself situated. I was going to tell everybody what our two main topics today. So first, we're going to be talking about how to start up a business. Now, if you've already started up your business, there's probably some things that you missed or some things you haven't thought about. So stick with us. And don't disappear. Don't leave, because first of all, we're going to be talking about starting up a business. Pay attention. There's probably some things that you missed or some things that you could probably tweak. And then second of all, we're going to be talking about how to have winning business exits. And they're closely related. Some of the principles can be kind of similar, but stick around, because both of those are going to be critical. All right. So we're going to go ahead and dive into part one and talking about how to set your business up for success. And hopefully Marvin will join us back. I guess he's having some sort of technical errors. That's, we're doing this live whenever we record. So, you have to be able to roll with it. But I'm sure he'll be back. All right. So mindset. It's something that even whenever I started getting into consulting, I kind of, maybe didn't dismiss, but maybe didn't take as seriously as I should have, which is funny because, I actually really love psychology. I love how the mind works and all that. So it's a little bit ironic, I guess, maybe, but I didn't see how important it is. The fact is, there are a ton of people who are great at making goals. You might be somebody who's great at making goals and crushing them, but there's a ton of people out there, especially your employees. If you're a high achiever and you have employees that just don't really quite always hit the goals that you set for them, or you just can understand how how they don't seem necessarily want more and have a bigger vision. This is really important. Okay. Or if you're an entrepreneur and you've struggled with hitting goals and you've struggled to grow, this is really important. Mindset is key because we're not really taught how to control the programming of our minds. In school, we're taught more about, how to find the hypotenuse of a, isosceles triangle. Did I even use the right? I think I use the right mathematical terms. So it's more important to figure that out than it is for us to learn how to better control our minds and our thoughts and our emotions to be able to be set up for success. And we can get into the schools and how they're set up, and that's unfortunate. But the main point of this is that our minds are running these subconscious programs, and our brains basically learn up to about age 7 to just that's the way the world is. That's just fact. And so anything that you learned about, self-worth, anything that you learned about your abilities and your skill sets and maybe, your glass ceilings after age 7, unless maybe you're one of the smaller part of the populations that look at some of that stuff as motivation to do better, and some drive to do better, it it leaves most people in a state of I'm never going to be able to make it. I'm not going to be able to achieve more. This is good. This is the way life is because our brains are wired for just trying to keep things calm, easy, what we call homeostasis, just to keep it simple and keep it right where it is. So mindset and learning how to reprogram, getting in the right circles, other business owners, other masterminds of other people who are trying to succeed, who want something better for their life. So that's, if you haven't heard of like a mastermind, that those are great because it gets people who are kind of like-minded, who are trying to take you to the next level because they're going to the next level, right? And so all ships will rise. So being in that circle of people who lift you up. So I would say even before you get started in a business, look for masterminds or groups of other entrepreneurs to get around. Even networking groups can be great, like BNIs and the master networks and NTIs. And I mean, there's a lot of them out there. Even local chambers. Get involved in a local chamber to get around other people, other business owners who are just like-minded, because typically the friends that we grew up with, they'll do more to pull you down than to lift you up, unfortunately, whenever you're starting your own small business. So that's huge. Okay. Marvin, I'm going to bring Marvin back in, and we're going to continue this topic here for this part 1. Marvin? Hey, Marvin.
Hey, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Well, I'm just getting rolling, and I'm excited for our discussion today.
I'm excited too. So I told everybody that part 1, we're going to be focusing on the business startup and how to set up for success. I've just been talking about mindset and getting the right mastermind groups and all that. And then part 2, we're going to really be digging into business exit stories. But I want to let you guys know who Marvin is. Marvin is currently working on a book, so he's an author, and he has his own podcast of business exit stories, where he interviews people who have exited, and sometimes they have some pretty incredible stories, right, Marvin?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think every business is unique. It's kind of like a fingerprint, Nothing is the same. They're each identifiable and have their own challenges, and every entrepreneur has different perspectives and background they bring to their business. So every exit, every scaling of a business and getting to the point where you've created some cash flow and value, everything is different. And that means that the exit's going to be different.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you might want to let everybody know real quick before we jump in and continue part 1?
Well, just that if you got folks out there that are sailing their own ship and, being entrepreneurs, either thinking of getting started or well on their way of scaling their business, or maybe at the kind of the tail end that they're thinking now about how to monetize all this hard work. I've sat in that chair, and I've sat in it a number of times, so I know what you're going through, and that's kind of what brought me to, what I'm enjoying doing today is that I've had that journey. I've had exits. I've scaled businesses. I've had the challenges of sitting in the chair where it's kind of lonely sometimes when
Yeah.
you're the captain of the ship and everyone is depending on you. And so I kind of empathize, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's important when considering even the startups. I think is considering, what does that future look like? What does the exit look like? And getting into the mindset of that, I think early on helps you to I think not get stuck and just kind of, well, things are kind of good enough right now. And I think a lot of people kind of get stuck in the, well, this is kind of good enough for right now, as opposed to, what would I like it to look like in the future, and why don't I start today and making that happen? So that's awesome.
Yeah, I think the reason they get stuck and it's because they're in the trenches,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to deal with the day to day and put out the fires, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's very challenging to get up on out of the trench on the hill and look down the road to what's coming.
Hmm.
That is a challenge for entrepreneurs that are scaling their business. So I get it,
Yeah.
and what you said is absolutely true.
So let me ask then. So we talked a little bit in part one so far about how to start up for success, and I was talking a little bit about mindset, because I see that so often that impedes maybe the business owner. There's a lot of entrepreneurs who kind of just have that gung ho mindset, and they'll accomplish anything. But that's kind of the smaller portion. But even those folks run into these mindset issues with their team members. So I'm just curious, like when it comes to like that startup mindset, what do you think are some of the key factors that people need to consider to really protect or enhance their startup mindset?
Well, I think that when you look at starting a business, it really, from my perspective, it really comes from where your orientation is at.
Yeah.
If you're starting as a kind of a solo entrepreneur and you're kind of migrating from an employment environment and kind of leverage your expertise, is a little bit different than a situation where you're starting a business from scratch that you know very little about. You have a great idea, and so I think it
Hmm.
comes from your orientation of the confidence that you bring to the table, and
Yeah.
really what type of capital. Most folks have heard that the biggest challenge for entrepreneurs is the deployment of capital and having enough capitals to sustain you. And I think the mindset is that the expectations you've set for yourself, and what kind of uh, time commitment and what your external expenses are, you really need to look at to the ability to scale your business with the right expectations of how long it's going to take. Very few businesses, with the exception of those that are selling their expertise and they're working out of a home, and that's kind of standard today. With the situation we find ourselves in this pandemic environment, it's very common. In fact, I was chatting with a close friend of mine that's been in business for a number of years, and his lease came up in March of this year of 2020, just as the pandemic hit, and he moved his whole team virtually and moved it. And so he really reorganized his whole expense structure. And today you can start a business with an entirely different, expense structure and operate remotely. And so it's easier to get into business. But regardless of whether you have a physical location or you have a virtual location, you're working out of a virtual office that is common these days. It's really this mindset of expectations of how long it's going to take you to generate
Ooh.
the type of revenue that's going to provide you and your family the type of living that you have, and having the right resources uh, already established before you jump in makes a big difference in the stress that you put on the business and that mindset
Man,
that you bring for
expectations.
success.
Yeah, yeah, expectations and expectations of how long it's going to take. That's that's significant, because I think a lot of people think, well, I'm just going to jump into it, and if you build it, they will come, right? So I think that's awesome. What else do you think is key? No, not just mindset, but in terms of like business planning, to before you even open, day one. What do you think are some of the critical things that people often miss?
Well, you mentioned, something there. You will build it and they will come. Uh, that, because you have a great idea,
Yeah.
and you think it's a great idea, and maybe you've had a little bit of initial success, but then you start accumulating expenses, hiring people, and all of a sudden, the revenue growth that you're expecting isn't going as anticipated. And
Hmm.
so I think the number one thing when I've interviewed and talked to people that have struggled or have failed in business is because they did not understand two things: really what their customer acquisition model was all about, how they were
Okay.
going to get customers, and what the cost of each new customer that you bring on. That is
Yeah.
something that a lot of startups, a lot of entrepreneurs, founders, is they don't adequately take into consideration of what that cost is going to be. And that cost is dynamic. I
Hmm.
was chatting with a person that started and built its whole business around Facebook. And he really had his um, cost of acquisition down. He had his model down to acquire customers, but he didn't own those customers. Facebook owned those customers. He built his whole business around Facebook and Facebook advertising. And so he knew if he spent $1,000 on Facebook advertising, he knew pretty much what he was going to generate in revenue. Spend a
Beautiful.
dollar, get $5. Your expenses are $2, and so you make a couple of dollars on every transaction, and
Yeah.
that was his model. However, when the whole privacy thing emerged and Facebook changed their algorithm of not being able to have as much insight because of privacy issues, that altered his world and he didn't survive. Uh,
Mm.
and so, what he should have done in that type of situation, I don't want to get into a lot of specifics here, but he didn't take the time to grab enough information from existing customers. So he owned that customer. He got their email address and things
Yeah.
of that nature. He was relying too much on one, source of his customer base, and he thought that was going to last forever.
Mm.
And in his particular situation, it did not last forever when they changed the algorithm. And then he was spending $5 to get a customer that generated $5, and that's not a great
Yeah.
model for profitability.
Oh man. Yeah. So owning that customer list. And I see that a lot in the service industry, where it's not even necessarily that Facebook owns it. It's like they'll go and they'll show up for a job. Maybe they spent money on Facebook ads, or maybe it was a referral, whatever. They go and they'll do a job, but then that customer contact information is like lost forever. Recently trying to work with a client who does a lot of work with real estate agents, and working on trying to build up their marketing plan. And I said, okay, so can you get me a list of all the real estate agents that you've worked with in the past? And he's like, I don't really have that list. So yeah, I think going from day one, how am I going to build a database that I own, that isn't going to disappear if one of my mediums disappear, is insightful.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a strategic decision made early in a lot of businesses, that you need to own your own list and build that your own list so somebody else doesn't control it, whether it's
Hmm.
Google advertising or direct mail, or whatever your customer acquisition model is. The world changes, and it changes rapidly sometimes.
Hmm.
Example I just gave you, it's just a flick of a switch in the ether, in the virtual world, that Google changed their algorithm, and Amazon, for those that do Google ads and things of that nature, just a change in the ever changing world that they work
Hmm.
in. Uh, Little tweaks can make a big difference, and you can see that your lead flow drop and your costs go up. And
Yeah.
if you don't have that customer, if you don't own that customer list, I think it's a strategic decision that can create enormous value or lead you
Hmm.
right into bankruptcy. Just
Yeah.
because of that one strategic decision of not getting enough information from your customers and having it on your servers or your computer so that you own it, so you have a fallback to go back to those existing customers and create another offer for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see that even with like Amazon stores too. If you have like kind of a unique product, especially, and it goes gangbuster on Amazon, Amazon will sometimes create their own version of the product and shut your store down. I mean, I've seen it, unfortunately.
Yes,
Uh,
that's
eh,
absolutely true.
so it's kind of that same thing. It,
And if you work in the Amazon world, they're very protective. That's
mhm,
their customer. They view it as their customer, and they don't give you that information. If the order goes through Amazon, you
right.
get the order, but you don't get any of the customer data. So you have to figure
Hmm.
out how to get that customer data. And
Yeah.
that's a challenge sometime in that world of Amazon becoming such a behemoth that just continues to grow and become more powerful, and entire businesses have been built around the Amazon platform, and
Hmm.
it's a challenge so that you don't uh, as you say, they decide that this is a profitable little niche and they create their own generic product that they can offer, the Amazon product that they offer to you, and they have no
Hmm.
compunction about doing that.
Hmm. Absolutely. So, well, one of the things that I often see with small businesses is they haven't necessarily taken the time to figure out kind of how are they unique in this space. As you've talked with a lot of these entrepreneurs for your podcast, and as you've grown and sold businesses, how important was finding that unique selling proposition or market dominating position, or just that differentiation within your target market? How important do you think that is, even at the startup stage?
Well, I can't emphasize the uniqueness unless you're competing on price. If you have a
Hmm.
product that you're competing specifically on price, that you come out with a version for whatever reason, either your cost of production or your positioning or your overhead, that gives you a competitive advantage on price. You need a uniqueness to your product. You need to
Hmm.
find a differentiation to your product that creates value, because if it's only on price that you're competing, somebody else is always going to come out with a lower price. It may be someone from overseas, it may be a
Hmm.
competitor operating at a different overhead structure. If you're successful, and the marketplace will note your success, and they will look at what you're doing and they will try to compete with you, and generally the entry point for any new competitor into the marketplace is on price.
Hmm.
And for those of you who may or may not be familiar out there with the blue ocean strategy, it's a book that was written a number of years ago that talks about this very point and the point of differentiation.
Hmm.
And they talk about a blue ocean, and that's a metaphor for a marketplace where there's very little competition.
Hmm.
And when there's little competition, the margins are high because there are no options. And if you're be fortunate enough to be an entrepreneur that gets into a blue ocean situation, and you've created a product that has value and the margins are high, the price is high, as I said, people will take note, and all of a sudden, a lot of other fish enter the ocean. And then pretty soon, the shark enters the ocean. That's a big player.
Hmm.
And that ocean, because sharks eat little fish, and the ocean becomes blood red. And a
Hmm.
blood red ocean is where it's highly competitive and margins are razor thin. And if you aren't unique and don't have a value proposition to stake out and keep your ocean pretty blue, it's only a matter of time before the ocean goes from blue to red. And
Hmm.
so a little bit later, we may talk a little bit about business exits. So if you're going to be selling your business someday, people are going to look at one of the things they will look at is what is your unique value proposition? What makes you different, and how
Yeah.
defendable is that uniqueness?
Hmm.
And if you can figure that out as you're growing and scaling a business or thinking about getting into the business, if you have a unique idea, a product, and you're going to launch that, you have to kind of think ahead a little bit of how you're going to defend that uniqueness and continue to make the product or service that you're offering unique on an ongoing basis in modifications, changes. Just because you have a competitive advantage today doesn't mean you're going to maintain that competitive advantage over the long term.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's some great insight, and I love the way that you described that using the blue ocean strategy about you want to keep it blue, and then if you're in those chummy waters there, yeah, you're in for a fight for your life, every day. So that's great. Now I know we're about to switch over to part two. We'll do a break, but before we do that, I did want to hit quickly on business, like building a business plan, and I think was it Dwight Eisenhower that said in preparing for battle, always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. How do you think that applies to that part of the business plan that relates to exit strategy? Whenever you're a startup and you don't think about how do I want to exit this business in the future, I think that kind of leaves you with a big blind spot. So how do you think that applies here?
Well, I think that it's absolutely true. And I remember reading that quote about, you know, Dwight Eisenhower,
Mm.
talking about, the minute the first bullet is, shot in the battle, the battle plan goes out the window, but it's the planning process that was important, because the planning process gives you in-depth insight of the situation. And
Mhm.
even though the dynamics change very quickly in real time, you understand the dynamics of the planning that went in, so you're prepared to make snap decisions on
Mhm.
a real-time basis. And that was really the value of planning. And what I have found repeatedly in talking to hundreds of entrepreneurs and people that facilitate exits, that work with founders exiting a business, is that the planning process will people will spend a lot of time, entrepreneurs will spend a lot of time getting ready for their business, hundreds of hours, maybe even longer, but they never think about how they're going to get out of the business. And that's
Mhm.
really the purpose of a business, is to create enterprise value. And so even in the early stages of planning for a business, you should have the thought process. Uh, how long am I going to be in this business? What do I project? Is this going to be my career for the next 5, 10, 20 years? Is this something I'm going to build and sell? You need to have that thought process as early in the scaling of the business as possible. If you
Mhm.
do have that mindset, you'll make different type of decisions than you will if you've never even thought about it before. So it is absolutely critical.
Awesome. Thank you for your insights on that, Marvin. And we're gonna go ahead and jump into the. We're gonna do part two right after this short commercial break. Jason, can you go ahead and run the commercial? Have you been suffering from chronic pain, disease, or sleep disorders? Did you know that 75 to 90% of disease is caused by inflammation in the body? The sad truth is, most doctors just treat symptoms rather than finding and fixing root causes of inflammation. If you want to fix your health problems, then finding and fixing the cause of the inflammation is a must. It's time to demand this for your health care and start living life to its fullest again. Book a discovery appointment with the Functional Health Team founder, Dr. Flory, to get your answers ASAP at www.functionalhealthteam.com. All right, and we're back into part two, and this is where we're going to talk about the opposite end of what we were talking about last time, and the big business exit strategies. And again, Marvin has a podcast that's all about business exit stories, and who doesn't love a good story, right? So it sounds like there was something deeper in here that made you start this podcast, Marvin. Like, what was it about, like, just sharing business exit stories with everybody else in the world, with other entrepreneurs, that created some sort of passion within you?
Well, I started the podcast primarily because I've had several exits in my career, and the last exit was kind of a different scale, and
Mm,
I hadn't been through that specific scenario before, and I was dealing with financing people and private equity and situations that I haven't dealt with before. And I just didn't know what I didn't know. And that's really true for almost any entrepreneur that's going through an exit for the first or second time. Even if it's the third time, it's always different, as we chatted about a little earlier. But when I stepped away from my business, I really thought, if I'd had been a little bit more dialed in on kind
mm,
of the mechanics of the exit and what I should have been concerned about, I probably could have done a little bit better. And going from the fast lane of growing and scaling a business, and all of a sudden you're in the slow lane. Um, uh, Driving in a slow lane isn't all that exciting, the fast lane and the curves and anticipation, and that's kind of the energy that entrepreneurs get. And I got to thinking about that whole exit process. And I love podcasts. I listen to probably 5 or 10 different podcasts on a weekly basis, even today. And I really enjoy stories. And so I got to thinking about, there's probably a lot of other folks like myself, entrepreneurs that should be prepared for an exit, but aren't as prepared as they should be. And so I decided that I would do a podcast that was a little bit different. I would actually talk to the deal makers, the mergers and acquisition advisors, the investment bankers, the CPAs, the wealth managers, the business brokers, folks that are involved in the transaction flow of facilitating exits for entrepreneurs and founders. And they bring to the podcast their deal stories, their good ones, their bad ones, and some really ugly stories that have real sad endings. And they share the takeaways of what an entrepreneur should learn from those exits. And so it's been a phenomenal. I've taught hundreds of stories on the podcast and the takeaways, and an entrepreneur that can learn from the experiences of others so they don't make those mistakes is always beneficial.
absolutely, absolutely. So, um, after I think a lot of people, when they think about exiting their business afterwards, they think, oh well, I'm just gonna kick my feet up, or I'm gonna, find a nice beach to settle on. But let's be real. Most people, the entrepreneurial drive, that might work for a moment, but not for very long. So, like, for you, it sounds like you went through, a few exits, right? So, was that kind of your idea after the first exit? Where you're like, I'm just gonna, just try to kick back and enjoy life, or
No, my first exit when I was in my 30s, I came out of school and decided I was going to, become go into the accounting world. And I worked for a large national, firm, and
yeah,
playing basketball, and got talking to a guy, and we became good friends. And before you knew it, we turned in our resignations and started our own business. And so we're in that business for nearly 10 years. And so I was in my 30s, and his objectives and goals changed. He was a little bit older than myself. And so we stepped away from that business. So that particular time, no, I wasn't looking at, smelling the roses and taking life easy. I was ready for the next thing. And, that happened a couple of times during the next couple of decades. But I did get to the point in my last exit where I did. That was the plan, that this business that I acquired, I didn't start it, I acquired it at that time.
okay,
And I had a vision of growing it, and then, selling it and exiting it at that point in time. And, pretty much did that. But what I didn't really plan on is, just like you have a business plan to start a business, and
yeah,
you have an exit plan to exit the business, you really need to have a post-exit plan of what you're going to do after you've
yeah,
sold the business, and you're looking at have a purpose and a reason. And that one I didn't nail down very well. I was looking forward to taking it easy. And we moved from the San Francisco Bay Area up to what is called the Gold Country, on the way to Lake Tahoe in Northern California. And I thought, my life's going to be a lot simpler. I can enjoy things and family and all that type of stuff. And it was okay for a while, but not a lifestyle that intrigued me. And that's why I got involved in the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So it's you still had to do something, right? You saw as entrepreneurs often do a need in the marketplace and sought to fill it. Couldn't quite just put your feet up. So so a post exit plan. Okay, that's cool. Maybe we'll have to do another time together where we talk about how to make a post exit plan.
Yeah, you have to plan for the exit so you can have a good enough exit. And create the resources, financial resources, to be able to, do things, post exit that you want to do. So it's kind of a two-step plan. You really have to execute at a high level because you've worked for decades, maybe, or some people even a lifetime to build this value. And I've seen, unfortunately, on the podcast, Business Exit Stories, there are people that drop the baton in the last lap. And unfortunately, their exit is subpar, and really creates some hardships on them and their families by not paying attention and keeping the eye on the ball and doing what they should do. It's not that difficult. It's not rocket science, but there is a method to the process.
I think I saw an example of that, especially one time. Somebody, they had a smaller, home services type business. It was, I think, around 15-ish employees, and when he announced that there was the acquisition and that he was, basically he was going to stick around a little while for the business, but for the help with the transition, but they were under new ownership. A lot of the employees felt like betrayed.
Yep.
What is a better way of going about that you've seen or heard about?
Oh, it is a huge issue. And again, it isn't rocket science, but you have to position the exit so that it benefits the employees. You have to be able to have the narrative and the story and create the future for these employees, because so often employees are the people that took the journey with you. They've been with you for years, maybe even from the inception, and they help build what you created. And often they feel jilted when you take all the money and go home, and they're left behind with very little to show for all their hard work. They have lives too. They have dreams and expectations. You need to be sensitive to that. And I believe it's an entrepreneur's responsibility to take care of the people that made it happen for them and reward them. And so there should be some sort of carrot at the end that they give them. And there are a lot of stories on the podcast of people that were very self-centered. Entrepreneurs are very self-centered, believe they paid their employees well. And as they are stepping away from the plate, they were paid well. I'm going home now. And as you say, it doesn't work out, because what a buyer is buying is just not the assets of the business. Generally, they are buying the expertise and the employee team that you've put together, the management team that you've put together, and that's what they're buying. And if that management team doesn't hold together and disintegrates after you leave, generally there are holdbacks or something that a buyer hedges his bet so that doesn't happen. And if it does happen, it could impact what your eventual exit is. So it is a huge issue.
Man, yeah. What have you seen, like, in any of your stories that you've any of the interviews? Is there an example of like when they did that best, when it worked out for the best?
Well, I would tell you what they didn't do. I can tell.
Well,
that's
a good start too.
The best things you never hear about, because things work out and there's not a problem. It doesn't become an issue. So
Yeah.
really the best things is that you've done the right things. Your employees are rewarded. They feel good about the exit. They stay around. The new owner brings new capital, new energy, and things
Hmm.
work out. You don't hear a lot about those, but what you do hear about are the people that didn't do it right. And I'll give you one specific example of an old crusty entrepreneur. He had a machinist shop. He developed tools, parts for the aerospace industry. And he had a general manager that had been with him that kind of ran the shop floor, and all the machinists and the operation side of the business had been with him for several decades, really crucial to the business. And as entrepreneurs do, they took the risk. He owned the business exclusively, 100%, but he paid his people well. And when it came time to exit, a larger company was buying him to get an entryway into that specific geography. And the advisor that was working with him said, you have a key person here. You really should give him an exit bonus, to renew his employment agreement. You need to give him $100,000, $125,000 as a retention bonus that he'll stay around. And the guy kind of went ballistic, and he said, I paid this guy almost $1 million in the last 5 years. He's well compensated. I give him bonuses, his company car. No, I'm not going to give him anything more. And very short-sighted, because when they went looking for the employment contract, he had an employment contract, but it had lapsed. And so they were now weeks away from closing. And there were millions of dollars on the table for this entrepreneur, and he didn't want to part with $125,000 as retention bonus. And so when it came time to sign the new employment agreement for the new buyer, he refused and said he was moving on. And a competitor was courting him, and he was leaving. And that was going to crater the deal, millions of dollars. And so what happened is that in order to get him to sign, it was a $500,000 check that he had to write. There was a $200,000 signing bonus and $100,000 for the next 3 years that he would stay on. So $500,000 had to be paid to that employee at closing in order for him to stay. And if he would have just parted with a fraction of that amount to reward his employee for all his hard work, that would have been a non-issue. But once the employee had leverage, he had an attorney that he retained who did his negotiation for him. And so he came out well financially, and the entrepreneur wasted hundreds of thousands of dollars because he just didn't have the right attitude about his people.
We talk so much about relationships and just how we're always dealing with people, whether that's customers or your team members or vendors or, even community members or whatever. And to think about the fact that there's so many people that, that whole like self-made millionaire thing, I think is kind of bogus, because there are so many people that played significant roles to get there. So that's a great story, and I hope people take that pretty seriously. What do you think is like the most common mistake that you see?
Almost categorically, I would say 70-80% of the time, or if not higher, entrepreneurs have this unique breed of people that have a personality that they're just excited about problem solving. They like to identify a problem, visualize a solution, put the solution together, execute it, and go on to the next problem. And they become really good at that. Whatever their specialty is, whatever their product service is, they become really good at what they do on a day-to-day basis because they're immersed in it. They just intuitively understand how to make the business work. And that's where they get their energy from. And that's why they love their business and sometimes so hard to let go. The problem is that problem solving ability, they kind of transmit or project that over to an exit. When the time comes to exit, I'll just figure it out. It's just another problem. We'll figure it out. And because they've been successful in doing it. The unfortunate thing is that the rules of engagement are different for an exit than they are in running your business. It's an entirely different process, different mindset. Buyers are looking for different things from you. And that I'm going to solve the problem and figure it out when I get there almost categorically does not work. And so there has to be forethought. So the biggest problem that people make is not positioning their business in advance to be able to be attractive to a buyer when the time comes. Because if you move around to the other side of the table and sit in the chair of the buyer and look at your business from them, I've asked entrepreneurs, I've said founders that says, would you pay the money you're asking for your business? Would you write a check for that amount? And they kind of shuffle their feet or look down at their desk and say, that's a good point. I probably wouldn't, because they know where all the skeletons are buried. And so, well, then you have to think like a buyer. You got to think and make your business so appealing to a buyer that they're willing to pay your asking price or even more than your asking price because you're so excited about it. And that's a narrative. That is positioning. That is preparation. Going down the checklist of all the things that a buyer would want to see to write a check to buy your business. Make sure that you've anticipated those and that they're all teed up and ready to go. Don't scramble, because when everyone is running for the exits, and that's the title of my book that I'm writing, is Pack Your Parachute. Pilots do not, pack their parachute when the engines are on fire. That parachute is there, ready to go. They grab it and exit. Okay. Because sometimes unexpectedly, and entrepreneurs are the same way. And that's why I love this metaphor, is because sometimes you have a health issue, or there's a competition enters the market. There's something that is forcing your exit. It's not voluntarily. Mm-hmm. You're burned out, or whatever the situations are. You need to have that parachute packed so that when the time comes, it's a very smooth transition in a very compressed time frame, so that you can just be ready to exit your business. Because again, I've said before, it's not rocket science, but there is a methodology that you have to go through to optimize the exit with the right time and everything in place.
Man, that's good. That's good. So we only got a couple minutes left. What are some ways that people can get a hold of you or find out more about your podcast and this book that's coming up?
Oh, great. If I had had a podcast like this when I was preparing to exit my last time, I would have been much better off, because there are all these stories of people that were so much like me, and things that I hadn't even thought about, and real transactional stories that take place. So just go to Business Exit Stories from wherever you get your podcasts, or go to the website, businessexitstories.com. You can go there too. And I have a little report that talks about how to optimize the value of your business and the things you need to do to double the price of your business. And you can pick that up at businessexitstories.com/report. And you just download the report. It's a quick read. It's 12, 15 pages long. And it gives you some of the insights of just parachute packing that we've been talking about, and getting prepared for the inevitable, because you're not going to live forever. And if you're not passing it on to a family member or a partner or someone like that, you're going to sell it to somebody else. That's inevitable. So you might as well be prepared for it. And it isn't that difficult.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on here with us today. And again, this information here for the listeners, go out there and do something with it. First of all, if you already have a business and take what we've talked about today, making sure that you have that market dominating position, looking at planning, go ahead and build a business plan now. Go ahead and build a pro forma and start doing it now to plan for your future, and roll in and prioritize this idea of a business exit strategy. Even if you think, well, I'm just going to hand it off to my kids. Well, what in the world do you want to hand off to your kids? Do you want to hand off a very valuable, wealthy business? Or do you want to hand off a bunch of problems that they're not going to probably want anyway? So thank you so much, Marvin, for giving us some great perspective here today. And I look forward to reading the book, and please check out his podcast. Thanks again, Marvin.
Oh, it's been delightful. It's been real energizing for me here today. I love this topic.
Yeah, well, it's great being on the other side of the mic, I'm sure. All right. Well, thanks. Well, Jason, go ahead and take us out. Thank you for being with us today. But now is the time to put what we talked about into practice. Remember, your family, employees, and community are depending on you to rise up and win. The great news is you're not alone. You're part of a resurgence of entrepreneurs who are ready to take their business, life, and impact to the next level, and we're going to do it together. This show is powered by Time for Success, where we help business owners every day who want more freedom and wealth while building a legacy of positive impact. Please follow Time for Success on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube for more helpful strategies and tools for creating the business and life of your dreams.